Let us pray. Gracious and generous God, take my words and speak through them. Take our thoughts and think through them. Bless us with listening hearts that are on fire for your word and for your world. Amen. In God we trust. If you were to look at U.S. currency, you're going to find the words, "In God we trust," on almost all of it, aren't you? These words are so commonplace on our currency that for the most part, we probably don't even really notice they're there anymore. But "In God we trust" has not always been a part that is inscribed on our U.S. currency. In fact, it did not first show up until 1864. And we recall that 1864 was the third year of the American Civil War. Both sides of the war thought that this conflict was actually going to only last a couple of days, right? That maybe there'd be a big fight and everybody would go home and that was going to be the extent of it. But at this point, it had raged on for 3 long years. The cost of the Civil War. It was more than anyone could have ever imagined. In financial costs, it was over $5.2 billion with a B dollars in the 1860s. American crops and homes were decimated as families watched war being waged not in a faraway nation, but on their own farms, in their own front yards. But above all, the cost of the Civil War was highest in human life. Over 620,000 people lost their lives in the conflict. Everyone was psychologically and spiritually affected by the devastation they had witnessed. Folks needed to be comforted. They needed something more to hold on to, something greater than themselves that's going to carry them through the wreckage of this war. It was actually citizens of the North that thought folks needed a daily reminder that this war and the death that it brings will not have the final say. But instead, they wanted to make a bold proclamation. We place our faith in God's grace and love and peace to eventually prevail over all of this. God will have the final say. Not death, not suffering. God will not allow this violence to go unchecked forever. So citizens, not the government, citizens began to petition the government, the Secretary of the Treasury, to inscribe such a reminder on the one thing that everybody uses every day: money. And in 1864, legislation was passed that on the 1-cent coin, and it also authorized the minting of the 2-cent coin, and both would bear the inscription, "In God we trust." When was the last time you saw that faithful inscription on your currency and were inspired by God's grace and love and peace and hope? Probably not too often. Because we live in a time when we're actually defined by the size of our bank accounts. Who's really human? Right? Who we say is equal is who has the most. I've heard it say that all we've done is inscribe "In God we trust" upon the God that we really trust: money. Last week we were introduced to this letter to Timothy, who was a pastor in a first century church. Timothy's being instructed on how to be a pastor to this new congregation. And in today's lesson, Timothy is told to caution his congregation against putting money and stuff first in their lives. One issue that the letter overall is addressing is an issue of false teachers. Right? There are people that are going around the world. It's not just Paul and the other apostles. There are people going around the world proclaiming a message that if you give them money, right, if you finance their ministry, then later on in the distant future, you'll be blessed with money too. Right? This isn't, we still hear this. It's called prosperity gospel now. Right? But the Christian way of life does not guarantee financial success or worldly power. In fact, Christ's message of love and peace and grace for all people, especially for those on the margins, is absolutely countercultural. It always has been. Christians put the greatest value in our relationship with God and with neighbor. But society says that the greatest value should be on money and on the accumulation of things. So there's always been a bit of a rub. So Christians have always kind of been at odds with the social and power structures that values anything above relationship with God and with each other. Culture says that you should always want more. Right? What you have is never enough. Never be happy with what you have. You need to make a grab for more money, more stuff. Then you'll be happy. But in verse 6 it says, actually, in response to this kind of mentality, actually, godliness is a great source of profit when it is combined with being happy with what you already have. So we're being told that a good life is not about wanting more, but being satisfied, even happy with what you already got. Right? That's a countercultural statement right there. Because when's the last time you turned on the TV or listened to the radio and they're trying to sell you a car? Right? It's all the bells and whistles and your life's going to be great if you buy this. No, you've never heard them say, I want you to buy this car unless you're really happy with the car you have. Then stick with that. Because this car, if you're not happy with what you got, you ain't never going to be happy with this. Right? They never sell any cars. No, you're never going to be happy until you buy this, until you grab hold of this. Then you'll be happy, and then you buy it, and then you got an extra payment. And you're not happy. Today's lesson is telling us that the narrative of more stuff and money making us happy is a lie. There's no nice way to sugarcoat it. It won't make us happier in the long run. It can't fulfill that void in our life that we're always trying to fill with money and stuff, because that void can only be filled with God and love of neighbor. Verse 7 and 8 tells us we did not bring anything into the world, and so we can't take anything out of it. So we're going to be happy with food and clothing. Notice that being a Christian is not a call to live in abject poverty. Right? It's not saying you need to sell all your stuff and go live on a street corner or something like this. That's not what this is getting at. They're still saying that you need to take care of your foods and your needs, clothing and all these sorts of things. But the letter is posing a question here, right? If all of your needs are being met, if you do an inventory of your life and all of your needs are met, then why can't you be content? We can't take things and money in the long run with us. So why do we feel like money and more things is actually going to make us happy? Verse 9 tells us that in this is kind of a hidden trap, right? So seeking after possessions and money as the primary purpose, there's actually a little pitfall in this. And verse 10 says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. This is a well-known verse. How many here have heard this verse before? Right? I would say just about everybody's heard this. It's one of the most quoted, it's one of the most misquoted verses I've ever heard. Right? I've heard it said that money is the root of all evil, as if money has this personality and is carrying around a pitchfork or something out to get us. And I've heard it quoted that love of money is the root of all evil. But what it says is the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Right? It's not saying money is evil. What it's saying here is money is a tool. And like any other tool, it can be used for good or for evil. That choice is up to us, right? Like any blessing. If we've been blessed with a lot of money, we have the choice to decide what we're going to do with that blessing. How we're going to share it, if we're going to share it, who is deserving of it to be shared with. To use our blessings to love God, neighbor, to love ourselves, to really love. That is being a faithful steward of any blessing that God has given us. Conversely, to love money, to love stuff more than we love God, more than we love our neighbor, this is the pitfall, right? This is the problem that verse 9 is pointing us to. But it's so tough. Right? In this culture, it's so tough to use our resources faithfully in the service of love to others. It's tough because we live in a world that purposefully tries to frighten us with a false narrative of scarcity. Right? The world tells us that there is not enough to go around. There'll never be enough to go around. So you better keep those people away. They don't deserve it. Right? If you got it, you better hold on to it. Because if they get close to you, they're going to want a piece of it. Hoard it and try to get more. Right? This is the same narrative that must have been floating around in the ancient world. This is why the letter is addressing it. Verse 12 says, though, in response, keep in the good fight of faith. Grab hold of eternal life. You were called to it. The author of the letter recognizes that living a life that values God and neighbor above all things is going to be hard. There's no doubt. He's telling Timothy that maintaining the faith, it's going to require energy and discipline of a well-trained athlete. Church, your faith journey's got to be a marathon. Can't be a 100-yard dash. So to help you make the distance, the author says, grab hold. I love this language. Grab hold of the true life you were created for. You weren't created and you weren't called to chase after material wealth. These things are going to fade with time. These things aren't going to sustain you at the end of the journey. You know, I was a paramedic for over 10 years. Saw a lot of people die in over 10 years. I've seen rich people and poor people, and not a one of them said in the last moment, boy, I wish I would have invested more. Boy, I wish I would have bought more. I wish I would have had more, because that would make this so much better. That stuff is not going to be there for you. I promise you, I've seen it. Instead, you're created to a different life. You're created for a life of love and peace. And the love and peace of God will not just sustain you, it'll fulfill you all the way through the journey. And then in verse 17, the letter shifts. Author's no longer talking about abstract wealth, about other people coming and taking wealth or something. He's specifically addressing members of the congregation who have wealth, who have means. And he says, tell people who are rich at this time, don't become egotistical, and not to place their hope on their finances, which are uncertain. Instead, they need to hope in God, who richly provides everything for your enjoyment. So the author begins this part of the letter by addressing the wealthy congregants with two warnings. Warning number one, don't be egotistical. What does he mean by that? Bootstrap mentality. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps. I've earned everything that I have. This is mine and I deserve it and you don't. It's an ego trip. Ain't nobody in the world that's ever pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. It's nonsense. Everybody's had help from somebody at some point in their life. And if you didn't, if you could say, nobody has ever helped me, you're the only human being that's lived in a vacuum, and somehow you become a millionaire at the end of the day, the gumption, the drive, all that stuff that you have inside you that makes you you, was given to you by God. You did not pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That does not exist. So get over your ego trip. And the second, don't place your hope in stuff that's going to be uncertain. This is why in the Great Depression, people were flinging themselves off of buildings. Right? They put all their hope and all their trust and all their love and money in their bank accounts. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. And they had nothing. Nothing. Because that's what it amounts to in the end. Nothing. Instead, place your trust in God, who is always certain. God's love, grace, and peace are unconditional. They are dependable. You want to take something to the bank, you can take that to the bank. The text says that God not only wants to give us what we need, this is important, but everything for our joy. There's joy in this. Right? There's profound happiness found in living and in sharing in God's love and peace. But I think it's important to pull out of here this part of the text, that the text is not saying wealthy people are evil, just like it's not saying that money is evil. We like to point our finger at the 1% and say they need to be doing more, they need to be paying more tax, whatever, and saying that somehow they're not as good as we are because they don't struggle as much. That's not what it's saying here. And it's not saying that the wealthy people need to sell all their stuff and be poor, or sell just enough of their stuff so they can be like us. But today's lesson is calling people that have been abundantly blessed, whatever that blessing is, money, intelligence, whatever, use some of the excess of your blessing to bless others. You ever heard that before? I've been blessed to be a blessing. Probably not, because the culture tells us you've been blessed, so you should want more. And blessed to be a blessing to others. And in verse 18, folks with wealth are told to do good, to be rich in good works, generous and ready to share. When you do these things, you will save a treasure for yourself that is a good foundation for the future. That way you can take hold of what is truly life. Love that language. You can take hold, you can grab it. Right? It's not something that's abstract. It's something you can actually get a hold of. See, wealth and power are fleeting. They're not going to provide you much comfort at the end of your life. I can tell you that. That's not something I read in the Bible. That's something I've experienced. But love, grace, and generosity, that affirms real life, because we are basing our faith in something that is greater than our bank accounts. By living lives of value, of relationship with God and each other above all things, we affirm our faith in the eternal promises of God's love and grace and generosity to us. So wealth is not being condemned here today. And it can be tough to not make wealth our number one priority in this country, and in so doing, lose sight of what is really important, what Scripture calls today what is truly life. But today's lesson reminds us that we can still be content, even happy, even if we don't have bank accounts that are overflowing. Because the commodity that we value most as Christians is not material wealth. It's love. You know, I think it's interesting that our culture really doesn't use coins and paper money as much as we once did, right? Most of us use debit cards. And I don't know about you, but my debit card does not say, "In God we trust," on it. I've been thinking a lot about that this week, and I've been kind of conflicted that it doesn't. And I've come to the conclusion that maybe it's a good thing that it doesn't. If in the 21st century all we've really done is inscribed in God we trust upon the God we really trust. Because the size of your bank account does not define you. And it does not define the grace and love of our Creator. Today we're being challenged to rewire our thinking, to go against the cultural grain a little bit, and say no to making the mad grab for material wealth. And instead to begin grabbing for that which brings true life. A life sharing hope, peace, and love and grace with each other. We're being invited today to have faith in God's eternal promises of love and grace for all people. Right? We said that last week. All people means all people. And to have faith that there is indeed enough resources and blessings for all people. And we're called to use our God-given blessings in the service of love to all people. And when we start to do those things, then and only then can we boldly make a faith proclamation that it is indeed in God whom we trust. Amen.